this is a reading that's being sort of jointly hosted by CavanKerry Press and my introduction to poetry class at Caldwell University. I'm very grateful to CavanKerry for calling together all of these wonderful poets that some of my students are writing book reviews on right now as sort of our final project. So there's some students present and friends of CavanKerry. So I usually ask Joan Cusack Handler to say a few words right now at the beginning. She's the founder of CavanKerry Press. And so Joan, are you there?
Just give her a sec. I'm actually going to see if she's on.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, so she is. Yeah, she is.
I saw her name a minute ago. She's been wonderful. Just so thrilled with being able to see so many poets whom she's published. She's the founder and publisher at CavanKerry, and she's just been so thrilled to see all the people so many of the people she's published over the past few years.
Is she muted?
It doesn't say she's muted. I'm looking at her right now, and Joan, I see your mouth moving. We can't hear you though.
Oh no, I can't even see her.
And she said, "I know." She's laughing a lot. I'll give it a play-by-play. Joan, let me try to read your lips. I'm just kidding.
I can only see Dimitri.
Joan, do you want one of us to step in on your behalf for now? Okay, Gabriel, can I volunteer you to step in?
He said he was going to be silent today, I think.
Oh, okay, that's fine. All right, so I guess I'll give the quick address. Thank you so much, Marianne, Caldwell College, the staff at CavanKerry Press, and all of our writers. At CavanKerry Press, we do believe in the twofold system of CavanKerry Press, which is publishing amazing literary masterpieces, as well as being involved with the community. So when COVID-19 happened, as the communications director, my job was to kind of try to curb the idea of not being able to actually see the public. So involving ourselves with other institutions such as Caldwell College and other places, we are very grateful for those who want to bring poetry to communities. And being a professor myself before I took on this position, I know how important it is for undergraduates especially to be fed this poetry and fed this knowledge. And it's been great. I missed the first session. I caught the session yesterday, and a student did mention how communal poetry is and how communal the arts is. And that's what's always brought me to the arts. And that's what brought me to CavanKerry Press.
Great. Yeah. And so Caldwell has benefited the last few years with having a number of CavanKerry Press authors come to our campus in various ways. They've run workshops, creative writing workshops for students writing poems for our student literary magazine. They've also worked with a group of students in my intro to poetry class, which is reading poetry, not writing it, but we've hosted readings for them at the Caldwell Public Library in the past. So it's been a wonderful relationship, and I'm so happy to continue it. So thank you for all your work, Dimitri. So
thank you.
Yeah, so let's start. Bob, you're right. You're on. You're the first.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thanks, Dimitri. Thanks for your introduction. I'm probably the person who's been with CavanKerry the longest, I guess. It goes way back, I think to 2001 or so, when they published my first book. And they've done 6 of my books all together now. And it's just been such a pleasure to work with them. It doesn't matter, it seems to me, as the press changes, it just, Joan has managed to always find people that care about poetry and about books, the way books get made. They're beautiful books. I'm going to read a few poems from a book that Only So Far, which is a couple of books ago for me now. But the book is about, you can tell from the title, Only So Far, the idea that we only get so far in life. It's a book about almost like Moses, getting to see the promised land, but not to cross over the river and get there. As Virginia Woolf, which is one of the epigraphs, puts it, the great revelation had never come. The great revelation perhaps never did come. Instead, there were these little daily miracles, illuminations, matches struck unexpectedly in the dark. That's basically what my poems are about, these little matches struck in the dark. Here's one. This is a much longer poem, but I'm going to read the last section. It's called My Father's Hearing Aids. My mother, I grew up in New Jersey, by the way, not very far from everyone here. I grew up in Bergen County in Palisades Park, and in fact used to go to a hamburger place called Callahan's, which is almost across the street from where, I'm sure it's not there anymore, from where Joan lives. This is My Father's Hearing Aids. Too costly to throw out. My mother says, my father's hearing aids, some whole, some in various stages of disassembly, lie in the top drawer of his dresser. It's like a museum exhibit of a lost past, of when he was still living, hand constantly raised to his ears, trying to take hold of the sounds that fell out of the air or floated around him like apparitions. I pick one up and fit it into my ear, as if my own hearing amplified. I might pick up something he is still saying, but all I get is that loud hum and screech, which like a rip in the scrim of memory brings him back. He's at it again, working to tune in the scramble of insect chirr, rain chattering on the trailer's metal roof, wind in the pines, a grandchild's high-pitched play, the buzz of his wife's voice. He wants to hear again without thinking of what he's hearing, wants the Sinatra song on the radio to sound exactly the way he remembers it, and not as if some damaged stylus were sliding across the black ice of an old LP. In the end, nothing ever came to him clearly enough. I see him spinning those little dials on his hearing aids back and forth, nearly frantic, nearly in tears. The world he's hearing like the static of space, those gurgling, stuttering, anomalous noises we have our radar pointed at, as if we cannot imagine being human, the deep, enclosing silence without another voice. This next one is, I'm 70 years old, by the way. And this next one maybe makes more sense to somebody who's 70. And that is, it's my memory of watching the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, which was, you got to remember now, TVs had just come in, and they were these giant consoles. They were like altar pieces. They were like, I think the one that we had was like 5 foot across, and the TV was probably like 16 inches. And we only were allowed to watch it on Sundays because my parents thought it was a Russian plot to brainwash us. So we weren't allowed to watch much TV. So this was a big event. 1964. Outside my window, 4 palm trees shake their mop tops in the windy cold like they're the Beatles, and it's 1964, and I'm 15, stretched out before the altar of a console TV, the wooden doors opened because it's Sunday, and television is allowed, recompense for early morning attendance at church. My father reads the paper, something no doubt about JFK's assassination, or perhaps the rumors of the war to come in Southeast Asia. My mother sews, and just when I think Sullivan cannot speak any more slowly, he lets out the magic words, youngsters from Liverpool, and the audience explodes and the night accelerates, and the Beatles, All My Loving, fills our living room, and I'm looking at Paul, looking at John, and even they can't believe what is happening. What is happening? I've forgotten tomorrow is Monday, forgotten the North Jersey sky outside our door, and how starless and alien it's always tinged with green from a neighboring electric plant. I've forgotten the tedious blocks of 50 by 100 lots and the ranch houses with 4 basic floor plans we all live in. The Beatles are in our living room, and whatever is happening includes me. When Paul smiles his "Isn't this cool? Isn't this nuts?" smile, I'm shaking my head, trying to make my too short hair spill around my face, and I'm beginning to think the world I know isn't the only one. And when the Beatles go right into "She Loves You," I'm all yeah, 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 so far outside my usual self. I let my father's complaints about the lyrics slip by uncommented upon. And even now, 50 years later, I can see their smiling faces. We're all there in the living room, my mother humming along, my father lost behind the Sunday papers, and me, unimaginably free, shaking myself alive, summoned into a future, knowing so little and wanting so much, armed with nothing more than joy and wonder. Here's one about the news doesn't do this anymore because it's all about COVID, 19. But the news always has one of those little spots. Usually, it's like feel good news. It's at the end of a terrible news report. They put on a little thing that makes you try to feel good at the end. This was the feel good spot of the news that I'm writing about. It was about the mating dance of cranes in basically the DMZ, which is the line between North Korea and South Korea. Watching cranes, I think of Camus. Tonight, our spoonful of uplift is red-crowned cranes, wings up, legs down, floating into the DMZ on the feel-good spot of the news. It's almost a sanctuary, the reporter says, this open, empty land that runs along the 38th parallel between North and South Korea for 160 miles. It's true. The cranes have found refuge here, the land peopleless, littered with mines and surrounded by troops, left behind to the birds for the time being. It's almost comical how the report shuffles between an opportunistic nature, rushing in to fill an emptiness, and the vague sense of some power larger than us, fixing once again what we've broken. I'm no better. I'm dragging up Camus. Yes, Camus, who wondered how we could ever be miserable, so much beauty in the world, but also how we could ever be happy, so much shit in the world. I'd have him do the voiceover for this final montage. A new day, the morning sun oranging the snow-dusted marsh, the camera closing in on a pair of cranes, their necks dipping, rising, one head bowing to the other, until the pair lift into the air as if they are levitating, then fall, their wings opened like parachutes, as they touch down ever so slightly on the earth where all that poised firepower waits. And here's a little love poem. It's called A Dog's Nose. I was at a writer's retreat in Florida, where actually I'm sitting right now, not at the writer's retreat, but Florida. And my wife was home in Connecticut. A dog's nose. We have a golden retriever at home, and I was walking on the beach and came across one. A dog's nose. Muzzle tilted to the wind, nostrils flaring, lips parted. A golden retriever just like ours seemed to live on air this morning when I walked the beach. Now, alone and bored, I'm looking things up on the internet and find that a dog's nasal membrane, if unfolded, would be as large as a man's handkerchief. And for what? Traces of urine, old turds, a female gone by hours ago? Just 3 weeks apart, and already I'm afraid I've lost your scent. 1,000 miles away in my little writer's studio, I'm thinking of you at home. I'm getting nothing done, unless you count what I've learned by Googling. Here's something. Heraclitus said about smell in the afterlife. Psyche's there, with no means to see or call or hear each other, find one another by smell alone. If you were here, I'd breathe you in, memorize your smell. I'd train myself until I developed a dog's nose. And if there is an afterlife, I vow, even if it takes an eternity, to sniff my way to you, who I trust will be on my trail. Here's a last poem about I make up a lot of poems that are newspaper stories. I love, in fact, everybody who knows me sort of cuts things out and sends them to me because they know how often I write things from them. This is a true story. It's about a piano that was found in the Miami harbor on a little island there. Tiny, tiny, tiny little island with just a piano on it. Piano. No one could say how it came to be there on an islet of sand just above high tide one morning. A grand piano, left for some Crusoe to make use of. The picture in the paper, a bird's eye view from one of those eye-in-the-sky helicopters, makes it seem like a New Yorker cartoon looking for a caption, or a piano looking for a gull to plink a one-note concert by John Cage. It could be an installation by an unknown artist who's waiting for someone to get what the piano is saying. Or just a late-in-the-night prank of some buzzed college kids looking for some music in their lives. No answers were ever found. Miami officials decided to let it be a roosting place for gulls and pelicans. Last night I dreamed I was fishing around the little island where the piano sits. Drifting close, I kept hearing the words of songs I'd forgotten, but it wasn't the songs that mattered. It was all the old questions that were suddenly pressing again. Where did it come from? Why was it here? What did it mean? The sun was hot, the sky so intensely blue I could barely face it. I wasn't catching anything, and as usual, only silence was answering the big questions. But I felt alive, really alive, tuned again to what is here without explanation. And I'll stop there.
Woo!
Yes, thank you so much, Robert. Judith, I think when you left and you dialed back in, you're somehow listed as me now. So if you make comments, it's showing up that I'm saying them, which is fine because I love your comments. I just want to warn you about that. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, don't ask me. Anyway, okay. Next reader is Tina Kelley, and the book that we have, maybe I'll hold up, it's a Bloom and a Rye. So.
Thank you. Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
I want to just say how beautiful CavanKerry books are and how good they are in the hand. They're very sort of velour covered with the French flap, which is just something that all poets aspire to. So I've always felt very lucky to be part of the CavanKerry family. And also, this is a fat book. This is a wide book because I have wide lines, and they made room for that, literally. So I have a lot of gratitude for that. And also, speaking of covers, if you see the cover for my next one, I really want to get it on a t-shirt. I think it is the most beautiful design imaginable, and I'm so excited for that to come out in October. I am going to start off with my Whitman poem. It's Baron Wormser was the editor of the collection, and gave me the suggestion to put 3 poems in the beginning that would give a sense of what my book would be like. And like Robert, I am very inspired by journalism. I'm a journalist for a living. And so there's some journalism poems in the beginning, but also this very Whitman-esque or aspiring to be Whitman-esque poem called Yawp. Read this love letter to life. Its pages turn in the ice fling off of the fast car's roof. Follow the traveling carillon, the communism of the gospels, the ice rink's joyful fourfold spotlight, how it shines the hair and adds grace. Eyes and words swerve into focus. Nouns marry in metaphor. Lines enter a stranger's memory and stay for 7 years. Smell the multiflora roses, honeysuckle, burning leaves. Feel the inside of the body, the smooth core. Watch the wren pull the dead fledgling from the hole, feather by dusty feather. Guess the stories. Tailless squirrel on the woodpile, condom under the old folks' home sofa. The lady's internal monologue as she guards the Lamborghini at the auto show. Red guts spilt like berries from rabbit mouth. I'd write even if each page's only destination were the stove for winter heat, again and again. And I think since Joan is here, I have several love poems in here, but one of them that she's fond of, and I am too, is Love Song to Boredom. It's what it says it is in the title. The placid ennui of toilet bowl water, Pachysandra, impatience, the somnambulation of team building meetings. Only an infinite and immutable object, that is, God himself, can fill this infinite abyss, said Pascal. Much of the time I sit around doing nothing, said the boredom proneness scale. Over 2 decades, people really bored at work are twice as likely to die of a heart attack. Some physicists believe time will slow, eventually disappear, and leave the universe frozen, like a snapshot of one instant forever, rollantondoed down an eternal car parts ad. But before all that, boredom, lift me up, inspire me. You have to get to the point of boredom and then get past that, the photographer explained. Get the safe pictures out of your system for the first 3 or 4 days, and that's where the creativity starts. Beloved, you are the emails from the guy who marks everything urgent. Unending weeks of Pentecost, catalog close and expense reports, 7th graders sing-songing the pledge, 3rd graders practicing recorders, almost every last black dress at every cocktail party, tax season, license renewals. Only after opal glint in the tarnished bracelet, one phrase in that awful novel, the second attempt at the recital, the caper among the canned black olives, the quirk, vigor, sparks from beige. You took me to the yawning edge and pushed. Thank you. I love the little finger snaps. I just feel like I'm in a cafe in the village. This is one that was inspired by a newspaper article. I used to work at the New York Times, and Science Times gave me so much inspiration. It's my favorite section to this day of the paper. Here's the shape of what it is. I don't know if you can see. It's sort of wide, sort of fitting comfortably in the wide format. And here's the epigraph that inspired it. But the traumatic underpinnings of life are not specific to any generation. The first day of school and the first day in an assisted living facility are remarkably similar. And that's from an article called The Trauma of Being Alive from the New York Times, August 3rd, 2013. And it's called We Had Such a Great Time Dressing Up, Having Fun, and Dancing to 50s Music. Everyone else went to orientation. Am I getting too old for my favorite things? My pretty pink dishes, 12 of them. Where is Buddy? All the hallways look the same, tan. Someone put the shovels and buckets away. Let's have another tea party. The wet sound of lips, warm chatter. But everyone else can move faster and remember instructions. I used to manage fine home, used to tie my shoes fast enough. Here they know different card games. They can all make it to the bathroom every time. Unpriable milk cartons, illegible smiles. I miss Mother. I want to read the next one. It's based on a fable that I read on the internet, and I had to track it down. It took quite a while to track it down, and it ended up actually being the kernel of the sermon at the church I went to at Easter. So I was quite amazed because it's an obscure fable, but it's kind of encapsulates the meaning of life for me. And this is in honor of Elise Partridge, who's a fine poet who passed away in 2015 at age 57. I talked to my twin, 38 weeks gestation. This is a kind of a tall and skinny poem. I think people need to know what shape poems are. I talked to my twin, 38 weeks gestation. Birth's the end of it all, you're sure. No one has come back, you say. You mock me for believing in life after delivery, in mother, in love. You have never seen or smelled her, but I know her by heart, her heart, bass drums surrounding our snares. She's all around us, warm, sloshing. You ponder the empty next. The cord is too short, you say. We won't be able to move. Tiny hopes just rise and die, and I'm a fool to think there's anything beyond what we know. But I know we will outgrow this tight scrum. Light will be more than on, off. Every inch we grow is a step closer to new splendor. We will hear her songs unmuffled. Life after birth will engulf delight. And after that, a third dimension for the color wheel, foreign music. Do not rest in peace, beloved. Soar, gamble, joke, be busy, string jewel words, exalt, exult. Who is sure death isn't a brighter world to emerge into? Thank you. And I'm going to end with the last poem in the collection. It's called Charmed. I stole a line from a Facebook post. I also stole the epigraph from hymn lyrics of John of Damascus from 750 AD. So the epigraph is, let all things seen and unseen their notes of gladness blend. And it's called Charmed. Why does anyone have to leave a world so stunning? A world serving up breakfast all day, diamonds forged from cremains, cirrus clouds to overlook from a plain, frost fairs on the frozen river Thames, world with haiku hiding in the clouds, specific angels overseeing only honey, only 10th birthdays, where, standing in the right fountain, you can see a rainbow ring bloom from your feet. Worlds with truffle salt, with the bright lines that river water flings on tree trunks. A world that lets you drive the clotted roads of the carpool and gives you the relief of turning really loud music down, where if you're sick, people you know turn cussedly kind, making it harder than ever to leave. A world where you may, with any luck, die on a screen porch on a warm, windy day. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and go straight through and then we'll have questions after that. Judith, you're next.
All right. Hi, everybody. I want to thank Joan, Gabe, Dimitri, Jonathan, everybody at CavanKerry for your wonderfulness and for, having the sense to publish my book. Haha, joke. Okay. Anyway, and I want to thank Marianne very much for inviting me to be part of this reading. I had such a good time yesterday listening to the poets, and I'm really enjoying Robert's reading and Tina's reading, and it's been great. So this is my book. I don't know if can you see it. It's called Practicing the World. And this book is a book of poems having to do centering on the time when my husband of 30 years was diagnosed with bladder cancer and his death and my early widowhood. But it also goes backwards and looks at our marriage. I want to say something about the title, because initially the title I had on the book was Practicing the World Without You. And CavanKerry said, no, how about just Practicing the World? And I thought, well, I kind of liked my title, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought, they're right. And I've thought about that more and more since the book was published. They were so right, because the focus of this book is not the without you. The focus of this book is the practicing of the world. And this is a microcosm of that for me, a major one for me at the time, major microcosm. Yeah, right. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Rescued Dress. I was married the first time at age 18, a marriage that only lasted 2 years. It was even a miracle it lasted that long. And you'll find out what else. Rescued Dress. Every girl I knew grew up coveting this gown. You know the one. In the end, Cinderella wore it. Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, too. Didn't all our stories end with dreaming ourselves into its silky arms? At 18, I fashioned my wedding gown after the one Olivia Hussey donned to become Juliet. My mother let me have my way, although she knew he wasn't right for me. Bought the pattern I selected and the ivory satin. Gave them to my grandmother, who stitched me into my destiny, trimming neckline, wrists, and bodice with pearls as tiny as seedling tears. As it turned out, Mom was right, as mothers tend to be. But how to throw out the gown, which now seemed to tell its own story? I couldn't keep it with me, not after I remarried in a dress bought off the rack. So it went with Mom, from home to home, hiding in basements and closets. But now, moving to a small apartment, she grew ruthless in her packing. Helping her, you, my husband, you, peeked into one box before hauling it to the dumpster. And there it was, my dress, still in one piece, still white, despite its banishment to darkness. You carried it to me, softly draped over one arm. Don't you want to keep this? How can I say no to such a man? One who reads the secret text that lies like intricate lingerie beneath such a dress. Who understands how a gift can survive, even surpass its first story, flowing now into this tale of his hands making this offer. So a number of years before his death, I was in Ireland, maybe about 5 years. I was in Ireland on a trip and with chaperoning students, and I fell down a staircase and broke my right shoulder into 12 pieces and crumbs. And so, came back. I had surgery over there and came back with a big, heavy cast on. So this is called Slow Dance with Broken Shoulder. And you'll recognize it as a sonnet. I'll say one thing about that. I found that more than in any other collection of mine or chapbook or anything, the poems in this book are written in some kind of form. Slow Dance with Broken Shoulder. Cast and all, we dance our kitchen floor, though my broken wing holds us apart, like some olden time bundling board, folded as it is over my heart. This spring, our woods turn young as we turn old, though new birdsong still catches us off guard, as much as when feet lose their earthly hold. Still, couldn't believe I'd take a fall so hard. But love, let's be voracious as the creatures after dozing away winter in their lairs, who guzzle all the good from our bird feeders, those pesky chipmunks, squirrels, and black bears. Let's dance with every hungry foe age sends us, until one finally dips us, drops us, ends us. Bruce was a type 1 diabetic, which also complicated his being able to deal with the bladder cancer he died of. So this is watching you test your blood sugar. Some evenings I practice the world without you. I don't want to, but the sky has ways of insisting as it takes on the sly intelligence of twilight. I make myself imagine blue without you, just one color, just one hue, the deep lapis of Mary's glass robe at Chartres, that virgin blue so dazzling, I gasped at it each turn on the labyrinth. I know I'll never make it back to an unworried blue. Even morning's cotton candy horizon is now the sweetness in the blood that warns you'll go before I do. Go first, like a kid off a ledge, daring the dark water's treacherous gleam. I keep diving for the blue, deeper than morning glories you plant for your grandfather, deeper than the eyes of the child you'll never father, deeper than the rivers of blood beneath our skin, as though I might arrive at the confluence where we too cannot be divided. Happy hour. Ever since the first snow following your death, deer have been appearing in our yard around the time we'd return to the fire to drink martinis. When the first pair emerged in their dusky coats, one gazed so long into my eyes, I almost believed I'd entered the dream I've been craving, the one where you return in a disguise I see right through. In our early days, I said you seemed deer-like, with your fawn dark eyes, delicate wrists. What about my studly biceps, you asked, flexing. Each night, I enter sleep, ears perked for your laughter, or for the soft crush of hooves on snow. I drift back to the earliest days of deer and human, through hunger and wonder, to the magic of sudden apparition under the opal moon's hypnosis. Back to the ancient belief that a deer's luminous leap could leave this world and land in the next. This afternoon, when I found an antler in the snow-dazed garden, I didn't recognize it. Rib length, it was pronged the way I pictured your bones when pain pierced you from within. But as my fingers closed over its cool curve, all the heat of the buck stung my eyes. His loss is temporary. His new antlers will bud in time for mating season. And I will be watching. Silent Night. Every carol this December sings your silence. I drive the icy roads we used to sing on to distract ourselves from danger, taking turns choosing the tunes till we ran out of verses, or until your reedy voice cracked on a high note or emotion. And embarrassed, you'd start replacing sacred words with naughty ones. It came upon a midnight clear, I'd begin, and you'd follow, that glorious dawn of old. Or you'd start, angels we have heard when high, and I'd refuse to go on until you promised to sing straight. But during the first Noel, you'd wander off again, a wayward lamb to certain poor shepherds who lay humping their sheep. You are going straight to hell, I'd giggle. You never stopped, even when our headlights illuminated storms of swirling stars, and I begged you to pull over. Maybe you knew that you wouldn't die that way. Alone on a cold winter's night, swaddled in the whispering heat of our all-wheel drive, I'm no longer terrified of icy roads. In fact, I'm almost hoping that one of these nights I'll spin off in your direction, singing, sleep in heavenly hiss. So, Robert, when you were reading your dog nose poem, it made me really glad I was going to read this as my last poem. It's called Flirting with Dogs. When you're a widow, you get your kicks where you can. Hey, cutie, you call to the blonde cocker spaniel hanging out the window in the car beside you. Male or female, who cares? Your husband used to cringe when you'd bend down to kiss a strange mutt on the snout. Good way to get your face torn off, he'd warn. But now you smooch whatever pooch you please. This eager Shih Tzu, the shy greyhound, the bad boy boxer who slipped his collar and went AWOL, all races, all creeds, even dogs with no breeding, whatever. You don't vow to love them forever, believe you can keep them from harm. You don't worry whether one strays, is tough to train, leaves a coat of hair on the sofa, or slobbers when excited. All you want is a chance to kneel in the grass and look into their eyes. For one moment, to connect to one another. You know, that's all you can ask for. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Judith.
My pleasure.
All right. Okay. Carole, are you ready? Oh, good. There you are. Good.
Do you see me?
Yes.
Okay, because I don't see myself. All right. Well, sorry for the technical problems. It's not my forte. But in any case, I'm going to read today from my book, American Rhapsody. And if you can see the cover, you'll see the bottle on the cover, which kind of sums up what this book is about, which is the era of Prohibition. So it's basically about American Rhapsody, a particular period, the 20s, and about the loss of my parents when I was 4. So what I'm doing in this book is reinventing them because I never really knew them. So I just have romanticized them from bits and pieces of what I was told while I was growing up. And this is a theme that I'm still writing about in my advanced age and probably will never give up. And at times I feel very guilty about it. But once a psychiatrist said to me that there are some losses that you never get over. And in some way that was oddly comforting because it sounded like, what is wrong with you? But it gave me permission really to feel this. So I'm going to read the first poem in the book because it kind of sums up the era that I'm writing about. It's called Invocation Intoxication. Oak barrels, hops, and yeasty brew answer the door for merrymakers rushing to get sozzled, tasty booze flowing from kegs, basement jugs, in bathtubs and stills, poteen, bathtub gin, moonshine, applejack, Mountain Dew, sacramental wine, blue skies smiling at me, bottles emptied, thrown on garbage heaps from nightclubs, saloons, and speakeasies, gin mills, whoopee parlors, new generation of moneymakers roaring their 20s. It's here at last, now for a new era of clean thinking and clean living. The Anti-Saloon League wishes every man, woman, and child a happy, dry year and a share of the fruits of prosperity, which are bound to come with national prohibition. On our side of the Hudson, across from the big-time racketeers, past the Hoovervilles, beneath the Pulaski Skyway, on bays and inlets of New Jersey shore, the Prohibition high seas operation transported cases of Haig and Haig, Piper, Heinsick, Booth's Gin from England, France, Scotland to Saint Etienne, Canada, and on. Nothing but blue skies do I see. To just beyond the 12-mile limit off Sandy Hook, the New Jersey rum runway, where men transferred them from fast skiffs to a fleet of World War I Mack Bulldog trucks. The chief business of the American people is business. Invocation brewing in my intoxicated imagination, the cocktail and I are born. That quote, the chief business of the American people is business, is from Calvin Coolidge. And of course, this book has footnotes to some of the historical stuff. I think maybe we're past the footnote era now, but they're kind of fun to write because in a way, they're just part of the whole scheme of the poetry. Okay, this is called Father's Voice. How dry I am, how dry I am. Nobody knows how dry I am. Was your voice rough as scrap metal? Did you say ain't and yiz? A man who only finished 4th grade, whose mother couldn't read or write? Did you hire a tutor to help you speak like the creme de la creme? To be invited to penthouse parties, mingle with high society? When you came home at dawn drunk, did you sing as you slid into bed beside mother? With slurred speech, say the names of showgirls you slept with, Tootsie, Sherry, Bubbles. Did the mayor you put into office, who led police sirens scream, escorting trucks to warehouses, scotch stashed, praise your setting up soup kitchens, sometimes filling bowls yourself, chatting with the hungry who voted for the politicians you bribed? Years later, they remembered that unlike Skinflint Hoover, you offered a meal. Then, of course, there were some, icon celebrities of the era. One of them was Kate Smith. For those of you who may remember, she always said, "God bless America" at the opening of, correct me if I'm wrong, is it the Dodger games? I might have that wrong, could be the Yankee games. But in any case, goodbye, Kate Smith. Our parents left the dishes in soapy water to listen to your voice boom, "God bless America," over airwaves into our Magnavox. Goodbye to our dream of one people, from the mountains to the prairies to the oceans we believed in while the world warred. Gone to the cherry bottled soda and July suppers at the Jersey Shore, kids at one table trading Wonder Woman for Captain Marvel, while grown-ups at another dissolved in clouds of Lucky Strike. The opal moon still shines on the boardwalk, rotting now on the shuttered funhouse on the ocean, white with foam. Another icon of the era, who I think has returned, or they have returned, Sue Barton, Nancy Drew, especially Nancy Drew. Mystery heroines. I'd have a badge. My code name would be Blondie, and I'd act like a moll. I'd go undercover to get the mob, find the killers, testify at their trials, risk being buried with garbage in the Meadowlands. But wait, would I be turning in my father? I'm no Fink. I'd wear a blue cloak, recitate patience on the late shift when no doctor was around, take a mercy flight, get the antidote to the dying wife, her husband pacing as the plane is almost torn apart in a cloudy turbulence. In the real life scenario, it's my mother who's sick, and there is no antidote, penicillin not yet discovered. Hurrah for Americans' heroines, for Sue Barton, Nancy Drew. Hurrah for me, my whole bright life ahead. And the last poems I want to read are at the end of the book, because they involve Edward Hopper. I was inspired by this actually by going to the Montclair Art Museum, and a painting of Edward Hopper's is called The Bootleggers. And I said, the Bootleggers, that's for me. My father was a bootlegger. So I went home and I wrote these two poems. Edward Hopper, Outside the Frame. In The Bootleggers, three men in black rain slickers power their white skiff towards a figure standing in front of a gabled house, almost lost. They might well be my uncles, evading the Coast Guard in quiet Jersey inlets. The one sketched in on shore, the sky blank above him, could be my father, his whiskey trucks outside the frame. 2. In Table for Ladies, a waitress leans over a row of grapefruit near a blackboard with specials. The cashier leans an elbow on the glass cigar counter. Still as mannequins, a couple stare across their table, as my parents might have. Maybe he'll buy a cigar, bite off the end, and then light it, flirt with the cashier while she makes change. 3. That's the artist's wife by herself again, wherever her husband sets up his easel, this time seen through a brownstone's window, wearing a red slip, bare shoulders white, as my mother's were, in her peignoir, waiting up for my father. Thank you.
Oh, okay. At this time, we want to open up for questions from the students. Maybe you want to direct a question to a particular poet if you're writing on that poet, or maybe you want to direct a question to all the poets, and you can all kind of take turns answering if you wish. And of course, anyone who's attending can chime in at any time too with questions. So,
what to me is so wonderful about poetry is the difference in people's voices. And I'm just struck by that every time I hear poets read together, and everyone's voice was amazing, and what their interests are and how they convey that. I heard narrative, I heard imagery, and I'm still thinking about it and imbibing it. And that's the thing for me that is the most moving thing in poetry.
I love that you used the word imbibe, given the content of your poems.
Okay. I just wanted to say that the reading was extraordinary. Like your work is extraordinary. So is the experience of sharing your work with the public. I'm honored and grateful for your commitment to poetry and your commitment to CavanKerry Press. Thank you very much.
We are the happy beneficiaries of all your hard work and vision, Joan. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Dimitri, did you start to ask a question?
I did. That question in the chat could fill dead air. If a student doesn't want to say something yet, I'll be a student. Lisa Selena said, wonderful reading, everyone. And yes, it was an excellent reading. If anyone scrolls in the chats, what I like to do, I usually do this with different virtual readings that I do myself, or when I participate in other readings at the New Eurekan or other things such as that. In the chat box, a lot of the audience members or the other poets put lines that they really like, or very poignant moments. So one of the poignant moments, for example, with Carole, I mentioned that I really enjoyed the Nancy Drew piece.
Oh, me too.
I was just talking to a group of students from Willie P this morning, and we were talking about how even, and this happened yesterday with the wax lipstick candy, right? The wax lips candy. See, I didn't know it yesterday as the wax lips candy, but we had the wax lipstick candy. So I was still able to make that connection co-generationally. So with these Nancy Drew pieces here, I remember reading the Nancy Drew books in middle school. And you don't know New Jersey from Minnesota, for instance. So it's interesting to get that extra context of being on the East Coast and hearing as an adult work about Nancy Drew now. So that was really interesting. I did have a question for Tina, because this is something I talked about earlier too, and all the pressmates can feel free to chime in. Many like to engage with the contents of a piece, as well as the interconnectivity of the context between each other's poems. But Tina, you did mention that knowing the shape of the poem was important too. And I'm a believer of poetry that aesthetics as well as the content is also important. So if you could talk a bit about how the look of the poem is as important as anything else, I think the students might really appreciate that.
Uh-oh.
Let me unmute myself there. There's a little feedback coming in. I don't know who it's coming in from. Okay, great, thanks. For me, it has to do with prosiness versus momentum. So my fat line poems often are the ones that are more like prose poems, more often based in journalism or long factual research projects I've done. I was workshopping one actually with Carole 2 days ago, if we can still measure time anymore, which I'm very bad at. But it was Monday. We were talking about a poem, and I had a very long, tall, skinny one, which is unusual for me. And it seemed to have more speed to it. It seemed to have more momentum. So I think there's something to do with both content and speed when it comes to the shape of a poem. And I'm a little wondering with my next manuscript, I had a real fat one, and I know that with the cover, the next book is going to be a thinner book. So I did a preliminary suggested edit so that instead of 3 long lines per stanza, it'll be 4 lines that will fit on a page per stanza. So I'm hoping that works, but sometimes it's a matter of not wanting to have those weird little widow indents that make a poem look like it wasn't on purpose. So that's another thing I think about when I'm thinking about shape, but I'm interested in hearing what my co-presslings have to say about that too.
Judith, you're on mute.
Sorry. Okay. I think there was a question for me from one of the students on the chat line, but came up and went away. Can you see it, Dimitri, or?
I can read it. I was just about to draw your attention to it. This is from Guadalupe. She says, I truly enjoyed your poems. They brought comfort and a lot of emotion to learn about your life and what you had to go through. She said how she saw beauty, even if there were dark days. Very inspirational and brave. She said, thank you for your book.
Thank you, Guadalupe. That's such a lovely thing to say. And I think one of the amazing things for me about very deep grief is that it is, at least in my case, it was punctuated by incredible waves of joy coming from the natural world, or hearing a song, or seeing a friend, whatever. I think grief turns up one's ability to, or opens one up to being able to experience almost anything at an incredibly deep level. And I think that's one of the things that happened to me. So thank you so much for your observation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Judith. That was very insightful. And that's the other thing too, especially with writers writing through trauma, you can't really have any source of it kind of goes back to the sublime quality of something, right? If we're thinking about Mary Shelley, you cannot have the grotesque without any beauty. There is an innate balance in those things, and I think that's what makes poetry so beautiful. I say to a lot of my students also that every poem's a love poem, right? Because if we think about love, love is just passion. So passion can come in many different forms, and that's something that we see in all of the swaths of books that we get, and when all of our authors read together. So it's great. And Guadalupe, I know you're shy, and that's totally fine. Poets are the perfect people to be shy around because we really just want to talk to you.
That's so true.
Gabriel also said something. Gabriel Cleveland is the managing editor at CavanKerry Press, and is a very, very brilliant man. And I just have his manuscript, this potential manuscript sitting in my inbox of his, so I can't wait to read this. What Gabe says here is, so many of the poems we heard today delved deep into memories from ages past, and as a poet myself who doesn't have a particularly acute memory, I was wondering if that's a struggle for any of you, fleshing out a description of something that happened ages ago and how you managed to fill up the worlds of your poems with that sense of place and visuals. I loved how vividly rendered so many of these memories turned out into the poems you read.
I could take a stab at that one. I've kept a journal since I was 14, and there have been times when I've had a topic and I've gone back to look at that period of my life in my journal to see what it was actually like. And it was a very handy reference guide to remember, what things look like and such back in the day that I'm trying to write about.
Thank you, Tina. Carole, Bob, thoughts?
Oops, you're turned off, Bob. Or
Did you hear me before?
Now
No.
we can hear you. You've got the mic on now.
Okay, should I speak?
yes.
Okay, well, I thought that was such an excellent question, because it is a mystery how one gets all these details, and in my poems, details are everything. I do want to introduce, Tina introduced the idea of keeping a diary, because I mentioned footnotes before. Research, you'd be amazed at the things that you can find out on Google. And of course, I was dealing with a period, Prohibition, and I've got President Roosevelt in here and Hoover. So I think that you're almost like, or I am almost like a research scholar in reconstructing a period of time and figures. And that's very helpful.
Am I on by any chance?
Yes, you're
Yes.
on.
This is Bob. This is going to sound awful. I do a lot of research for my poems, but I also lie considerably. I write poems that sound as if everything in them has happened exactly as it happens in the poem, but that's not true. For details for me are everything. And I think the truth that you write about is the truth to the emotion that you're writing about, not necessarily the details that you're writing about. Landscapes for me figure quite importantly in my poems, but they're often from a number of different places on the East Coast. They're real in the sense that they're spliced together from Connecticut to Maine or in the Florida region, but so much of them is not just an actual memory, but also, a made up, a made up detail that has to do with what the poem is about.
When my parents were still alive, and at that time I was writing a lot of poems about my family. I was quite a bit younger, and I'd read my mother a poem, and she'd say, "Now, when you write a poem, it's both sort of kind of true and kind of not, right?" And, the point being that, well, wait a minute, I don't remember it quite that way. I mean, I wasn't trying to lie. Jonathan made a comment about, on the chat, about being true to the truth. I mean, the deep truth. And I think that's what that's what I was trying to do. And every single time, yeah, it can be both true and not true, right? So yeah, lying is helpful.
Lying is good.
Lying is good. We agree.
Oh my goodness, this is going on YouTube. We just got all our writers on the record saying that. Oh joy.
Lying is good.
Yeah.
The thing that we forget is that, poems are fictional, as they're autobiographical, but they're also fictional.
Right.
Yeah. That doesn't mean that, you lie about the truth of emotion.
That's right.
It just seems like like a fiction writer, you make up details.
This morning I was writing a poem about the aunt and uncle who brought me up. And I said, Aunt Elsie had shoulders like a football player. And my husband said, but she didn't. And I said, so what?
I think what we're doing is striving for an emotional truth.
Yes.
And so we gather that our muse or our self, our unconscious offers to us, and then we fill in with others. But basically, that's what we're after, is an emotional truth.
Thanks for that, guys.
I wanted to make a comment, an observation. Bob, you use news stories a lot, and another poet friend of mine, Marjorie Maddox, does that too. And I'm really intrigued by that because, I've never really been able to do that. I've tried to get students to do it, and they've done it better than I have ever been able to. I hate it when that happens. No, I love it. But it amazes me that you can take one of those little stories and turn it into something so emotionally resonant. And something that completely unconnected to yourself, at least on the outside. And I just wanted to say that I see that as kind of amazing.
I think for everyone, there are things, they're just facts that are metaphorical. I mean, I love facts, and you love facts because they resonate with you.
Yeah.
How, I remember I've been carrying around a story about a frog that gives birth to its young out of its mouth.
Oh my gosh.
And I have thought for 20 years that that's how I want to write a poem. That it's just like giving birth to words out of your mouth. And I've never written this poem about this frog. I've never been able to do it yet, but that's how they hit me, though, that I immediately can see a metaphor of my own life, some yearning, some striving, some connection.
You do notice that he just said he loves facts. I remember what he said just a minute ago about
I love to
lies.
lie as well.
Poetic paradox.
Fake news.
That's good.
That's perfect.
Are any of the students still around? Students?
What inspired you guys to write poetry?
Ooh. That's a good one.
Well, am I on right now? This is Bob. For me, it happened in high school. I was reading. I didn't like school, but I was reading my anthology of poems, even though we weren't required to read them. I was reading a poem by T.S. Eliot called "The Hollow Men," and as I read it, I found myself weeping uncontrollably. I had no idea what the poem meant whatsoever. Eliot once wrote an essay about that very thing, that we often feel a poem's rhythms and sound before we understand it intellectually. And that's what happened to me. And at that moment in my life, I knew I wanted to be able to do that. I wanted to be able to make someone else feel the way I felt reading his poem.
I'd like to address that question. I think it's an excellent question. I remember the exact moment when I wrote my first poem. I was 12 years old, and we were reading Longfellow and John Greenleaf Whittier in English class, and I hated them. And somehow I found the Harlem Renaissance poets. And so I wrote my first poem by trying to emulate them. And that just kind of got me started. And that's how I began writing poetry. And I still don't like Longfellow.
When I was in high school, I loved Emily Dickinson and Stephen Crane. And all right, dirty little secret. You know, of course, I was only 16 years old. Rod McEwen. Yeah, I kind of got over that one. But in any event, just reading poetry. My boyfriend didn't call me the night before my 16th birthday. And that was the end of our relationship. He just went out of sight. That night, I was just devastated. And my mother brought me 2 of my birthday presents from the next day, which were 2 volumes of Rod McEwen's poetry. But the thing that was amazing about that was that she knew that in a way that she couldn't do anything about, that poetry meant something to me that could make me feel better, or at least could make me feel partnered in my sadness. And I think, even though, I see Rod McEwen as sort of the weird uncle of my poetry family. I think that at that time, it was just amazing to me that somebody else, even though she wasn't a poetry reader, could recognize how important poetry could be in our lives and how important it was in my life at that time. Yeah, I guess I was already writing at that time. How about you? Lisa? Lisa. Oh, you're on mute.
Lisa writes.
Yeah.
I think Guadalupe fielded that question. Am I correct?
She did, yes.
Yes, that question. Yes, yes, Guadalupe. Lisa does write poetry too. Tina, did you? I don't think you commented yet. Is Tina still?
Oh, I meant Tina. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm here. I started when I was 8. I had an English teacher who was encouraging, and I think I was very eager to please. And if she told me I'd done wonderful artwork, I might have tried to do better artwork and more artwork. But ever since, it's just kind of been what comes out when I sit down to do creative writing. So I kind of can't get out of it. I sometimes wish I could be a novelist or somebody whose writing gets read, in a huge commercial audience, but doesn't. So it's what happens when I sit down to write.
Tina, I have confidence that you could be a novelist.
Oh, thank you. I have one in me somewhere, a novel.
Guadalupe, thank you so much for your question. You really got a good conversation going.
Yes, thank you.
That's right. Actually, talking about writing a novel is a good segue into the question I was going to kind of ask to wrap up with too. It's a question we often ask in the poetry class. Why write a poem about the experience? What about the experience makes the poem the right form for it? And it kind of brings in what Tina's saying about the shape of it, also about the emotional involvement, I think. A number of these topics you've all been talking about. I know it's a hard question, but kind of a culminating one anyway, hopefully.
I think for me,
sorry, go ahead.
Sometimes I feel like I have a poem in me and I write it and it's dreadful and it turns into an essay and it's a really good essay. So sometimes the material tells you what it wants to be. And I'm happy about that. And I did take this novel I'm thinking of and made it into a sonnet, and it was perfectly fine and made me sort of want to stop at a sonnet and not have to write the whole damn novel.
That is so great.
Well, I have not written a novel, but I have written short stories. And I find that very gratifying in its own way. But it's just, I don't know, it's a different process. I guess at the moment I can't explain it, but I'm going to think about that question because it's an excellent question.
I've never written a novel either. I've written a nonfiction memoir, and I write a lot of essays. But and I'm kind of like you, Tina. I find that sometimes I'm trying to write a poem, and I realize it's just I'm bogging down in language, and and all of a sudden I realize, oh wait, this wants to be an essay instead of a poem, and sometimes vice versa too. But I absolutely love it that you turned your novel into a sonnet.
I'd like to pop in here for a second. It's Joan. I had the experience of writing my book, Orphans, is written in 3 voices, and when I tried to set them up using the same form, and they would absolutely not accept the identical. So I literally, each character wanted its own shape, its own tone. So that was an amazing experience because I literally couldn't make the lines shape into what I wanted. Mm-hmm. And I finally gave in and gave the poem itself the right to choose.
Wow.
Dimitri, do you want to say anything, maybe, or Joan, about the fact, maybe one way to close too is to talk about how CavanKerry publishes more than published poetry, but also other genres, And then I also wanted to recognize Tina Kelley just by name here. She is the one that I think who really linked me to CavanKerry, and told me about that your poets do outreaches, your authors do outreaches and community service. So I wanted to thank her by name today. We kind of, if it's possible to trace an origin, it is in this particular case. So, but anyway, any more words, Dimitri? You want to say? You write poetry, right? Do you want to finish up with that why poem? Or
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Joan close us out with the various different projects that we do, but I will say this, Tina, thank you for linking so many different people together. Tina is literally the tendon between a bunch of different places in New Jersey. I would not be working for CavanKerry Press if it wasn't for Tina Kelley. We probably wouldn't have done this so well if it wasn't for Tina Kelley. I wouldn't be smiling if it wasn't for Tina Kelley smiling over there. She's really the poet's poet. And I think it's really important that other poets align themselves with poets that are poets in order to continue poeting the right way. And Tina is the epitome of that.
You know, I'd love to say something about that. Kind of generosity that Tina demonstrates is so critically important for the sense of community that CavanKerry is interested in establishing, because it's not just our readers or potential readers that we want to make contact with, but it is poet to poet, writer to writer, and offering opportunities to writers, making things happen for fellow writers is an incredibly generous spirit. So I actually will be shameless and say many of you teach and have access to opportunities to invite CavanKerry writers to join you.
Yeah, with that being said, I think it just really speaks to everything that CavanKerry stands for. And if anyone is interested in either having some of our books be in your classrooms, or to bring some of our authors to your classrooms when things resume, or even if you have colleagues for those things, you can definitely contact me. I think I'm pretty sure everyone has my email, but just to be professional, I'll leave my email in the chat box anyway. And if you have other ideas for that kind of stuff, just reach out to me and we can make something happen. We basically have the entire month of May booked in terms of having live readings or asynchronous readings happening throughout the month. And I'll be looking forward to doing this continuously, depending on whatever's going on in terms of COVID, and even once we're all outside again. So I'll put that in the box over here.
And I'll be looking forward to shipping out all the books.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, for sure. We're also going to, once I get all these recordings, I'll compile them probably in separate videos, and I'll put this up as a playlist on our YouTube channel. When I do that, this will probably come out in a newsletter, or if I fall behind just because I'm doing so many things, just reach out to me and be like, hey, Dimitri, did you put that up yet? And I'll send you the link so you could send to your various networks.
Okay. What do you have?
I would love to make my final comment about the efforts of Dimitri in making this kind of thing happen. Marianne and Dimitri had to dazzle us all with their footwork in order to make something like this happen. And we're very glad and we're delighted. And I'm very proud of and grateful for my staff, for Dimitri, for Gabriel, managing editor, and for Jonathan, our development director. There's no way that CavanKerry could run this well without an incredible amount of energy, intelligence, and generosity. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Joan.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for making it possible for us to make it possible, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
gratitude to you,
Yeah.
Joan, for the press and for all you do.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I just want to thank you all too for all the time that you've put into this, all the emails with Dimitri, all the arrangements. I know the time it takes to choose poems that are so wonderful and read them. And I just want to let you know that even though, you know, a handful of students came, I obviously am sending this recording out to a number of them. And so I thank you for all the time you put into it, because many more will see this. And I
It's a
know they
wonderful
learned
reading.
so much from you. So
Thank you.
thank you, everybody. Be well. And
Thank you.
Be in touch.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, poets. Thank you, CavanKerry.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Marianne.
Bye-bye,
That's right.
everyone. Have a great
Good.
evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.